George Harrison was 32 years old, and until that frozen Thursday evening in December 2024, he thought the distance between him and his wife was just the price of her ambition. He was a senior cybersecurity analyst in Seattle, making about $140,000 a year, and for the past 4 years, he'd been married to Ashley Turner, a woman whose smile could light up a boardroom and whose secrets, he was about to discover, could destroy his entire life. That evening, George made a decision that seemed romantic but would reveal a betrayal so calculated, so devastating, that it wouldn't just shatter his heart, it would nearly destroy his freedom. He decided to surprise his wife at her luxury real estate conference in Aspen, Colorado. He had no idea that the woman he was flying to embrace was, at that very moment, plotting to send him to federal prison. But before I tell you what George heard behind that hotel door, the conversation that would change everything, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what happens next isn't just a story about cheating. This is about a financial crime, a frame job, and a revenge plot so perfectly executed that it ends with federal agents storming a black tie gala. Drop a like if you've ever trusted the wrong person, and comment below. What would you do if you discovered your spouse was destroying your life? Now, let me tell you how this nightmare began. Ashley worked as a luxury development director for Pinnacle Vista Properties, closing multi-million-dollar deals on waterfront developments that reshaped Seattle's skyline. Her base salary had hit $180,000, with commission bonuses that sometimes doubled that in a single quarter. George had never felt threatened by her success. If anything, he'd been her biggest cheerleader, celebrating every closed deal, every glowing review from her managing partners, every invitation to exclusive industry events where champagne cost more per bottle than his monthly car payment. Their marriage had seemed rock solid. They had Sunday morning rituals, farmers market visits, followed by brunch at their favorite spot on Pike Place. They talked about buying investment property together, maybe starting a family once Ashley made senior partner. They'd just finished renovating their master bathroom, spending evenings scrolling through restoration hardware catalogs, playfully debating the merits of Italian marble versus quartzite countertops. George thought they were building something real. Something that would last. This particular trip was supposed to be a 4-day luxury real estate summit at the St. Regis Resort in Aspen, the Vista Conference, an exclusive gathering where the industry's elite networked, closed deals, and positioned themselves for the next level. Ashley had left on Tuesday morning, kissing him goodbye at their doorway, her Rimowa aluminum luggage, a gift from her firm for breaking sales records, rolling behind her as she headed to her Tesla Model Y in their reserved parking spot. She'd seemed distracted that morning, almost cold, checking her phone obsessively during their coffee. But George had attributed it to pre-presentation nerves. She was unveiling a major development proposal to a group of high-net-worth investors, she'd explained, barely making eye contact. A waterfront project in Vancouver that could redefine her career. This conference could change everything for us, babe, she'd said, adjusting her Burberry scarf in the hallway mirror. Marcus thinks I'm ready to lead my own acquisition team. Marcus Thorne was Ashley's biggest investor connection, a venture capital heavyweight who'd been backing Pinnacle Vista's most ambitious projects. George had met him once at a company yacht party, a silver-haired man in his late 40s who wore Bryony suits and had the kind of effortless confidence that came from generational wealth. He'd made $40 million in tech exits before pivoting to real estate. Ashley had always described him as a mentor figure, someone who was opening doors that would normally take decades to access. George had trusted that completely. Why wouldn't he? He'd planned to spend the week alone, working remotely from home, handling security audits for his firm's West Coast clients while watching the Seahawks game on Sunday. It was a comfortable routine. Order sushi, work from the couch in his sweatpants, enjoy the rare silence of an empty apartment. But Wednesday afternoon, everything shifted. His firm awarded him an unexpected year-end bonus, $8,500 for identifying and patching a critical vulnerability that had saved a Fortune 500 client from a potentially catastrophic data breach. His manager had praised him in the all-hands meeting, calling him the quiet genius who saved us millions. George stared at the direct deposit notification, and an idea sparked. $8,500 wasn't life-changing money, but it was enough to do something spontaneous. Something Ashley would never expect from her methodical, predictable husband. She'd been so stressed lately, working 14-hour days, taking calls at midnight with international investors. When was the last time they'd had a real moment of connection? When was the last time he'd swept her off her feet? He spent 2 hours researching flights. There was an Alaska Airlines flight leaving Thursday at 11:45 a.m. that would get him to Aspen by 3:20 p.m. Round-trip ticket, $680. He booked it without hesitation. Then he arranged everything else. He found the St. Regis concierge number and confirmed Ashley's room number, Suite 412, a luxury chalet-style accommodation. He ordered her favorite champagne, Veuve Clicquot La Grande Dame, to be waiting in an ice bucket. He even stopped at Pike Place Market that morning to pick up 24 white roses, the flowers she'd carried at their wedding. The flight was smooth. George spent the 2-hour journey reviewing security protocols for work, but his mind kept drifting to his marriage. They'd met 5 years ago at a tech industry mixer in Seattle. Ashley had been working in commercial property management then, hustling to make connections. George had just been promoted to senior analyst. They'd bonded over demanding careers and dreams of building something significant together. They'd married after 18 months of dating, in an intimate ceremony at a boutique hotel in Woodinville wine country. 90 guests, a string quartet, vows they'd written themselves. Ashley had promised to choose us, even when the world offers everything else. George had promised to be the foundation you build your dreams on. For 4 years, he'd thought those promises were sacred. By the time the plane touched down in Aspen, the sun was already setting behind the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of amber and rose. George collected his bag, grabbed an Uber to the St. Regis, his heart pounding with anticipation. The resort was exactly as opulent as he'd imagined, all stone and timber and floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing impossible mountain views. The lobby smelled like cedar and expensive candles. George checked his phone. 4:47 p.m. Perfect timing. He made his way to the elevator. 4th floor. Suite 412 was at the end of the hallway, a corner unit. As George approached, roses in one hand, champagne in the other, his smile beginning to form. He heard it. A sound that made his blood crystallize in his veins. Low. Unmistakable. The rhythm of intimacy that every married person recognizes instantly. George froze 3 feet from the door. Then he heard her voice. Ashley's voice. Breathless, saying a name that wasn't his. Marcus. God, Marcus. And then, seconds later, a man's voice. Deep. Satisfied. Does he have any idea what we're doing with his credit? Ashley's laugh. That laugh he'd fallen in love with. Cold now. Calculating. George. Please. He's so buried in his security audits, he wouldn't notice if I drained his accounts tomorrow. By the time the loan documents hit, I'll already have the divorce filed. He'll be holding the bag for everything, and we'll be in Grand Cayman watching it all burn. George Harrison stood in that hallway, champagne and roses in hand, and felt his entire world collapse into a single, clarifying point of rage. He didn't knock. He didn't break down the door. Instead, he did what he did best. He turned his grief into a weapon. And he started to plan. George's hands trembled slightly as he zipped his overnight bag, the jewelry box containing Ashley's upgraded wedding band tucked carefully between folded shirts. The upgrade had cost him $4,200, a platinum setting with small diamonds encircling the band. He'd been saving for 6 months, planning to give it to her on their actual anniversary in June. But standing in their bedroom that Thursday morning, the bonus money burning a hole in his account, he decided that today was perfect. Why wait for an arbitrary date when he could create a moment she'd never forget? The Uber to SeaTac took 30 minutes through typical Seattle drizzle. George checked his phone obsessively during the ride, rereading Ashley's last text from the night before. Conference is exhausting but productive. Miss you. Don't wait up. Investor dinner running late. He'd responded with a heart emoji, already knowing he'd be seeing her in person the next day. Security moved quickly for a Thursday. George made it to his gate with 40 minutes to spare, grabbing an overpriced coffee and a breakfast sandwich he barely tasted. His leg bounced with nervous energy as he waited to board. He kept imagining her face, that split second of confusion when she'd opened the door, followed by pure joy when she realized it was him. Maybe she'd cry a little. Ashley didn't cry often, But when she did, it was beautiful. The flight attendant's voice crackled through the speakers. Alaska Airlines Flight 438 to Aspen. We're now boarding all passengers. George was in Group 3, a window seat. He settled in, watched Seattle disappear beneath the clouds, and spent the 2-hour flight oscillating between excitement and elaborate planning. He'd already made the restaurant reservation. After dinner, maybe they could walk through downtown Aspen, look at the ridiculous boutiques neither of them could afford, grab hot chocolate somewhere cozy. The descent into Aspen was breathtaking, jagged peaks dusted with fresh snow, the valley below glowing in late afternoon sun. George's heart hammered as the wheels touched down at 3:17 p.m., 3 minutes early. He texted the concierge to confirm the champagne delivery, grabbed his bag from the overhead, and practically jogged through the small airport. The Uber driver was chatty, pointing out landmarks and celebrity homes as they wound through town toward the St. Regis. George responded with automatic politeness, his mind already in that hotel suite. The roses were waiting at the front desk when he arrived, perfect white blooms, exactly like their wedding. The concierge handed them over with a knowing smile. Special occasion, sir.
Anniversary, George Leet, smiling.
Close enough. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt endless. His reflection in the polished brass doors showed a man who looked younger than 32, energized by surprise and romance. The hallway was hushed, carpeted thick enough to absorb his footsteps.
Suite 412.
Corner unit. He could see mountain views through the window at the hall's end. George shifted the roses to his left hand, the champagne bottle cold against his right arm. His heart was doing something complicated in his chest, excitement mixed with the vulnerable terror of grand gestures. What if she was annoyed he'd interrupted her work trip? What if this was too much? He was 3 feet from the door when he heard it. Not conversation. Not a TV show. Something else. Something unmistakable. The rhythmic sound of intimacy. Breathless.
Urgent.
George's body went rigid, champagne bottle suddenly weighing 1,000 pounds. Then her voice, muffled through the door but absolutely clear. Marcus. God, yes. The hallway tilted. The roses slipped slightly in his grip, petals brushing against his frozen fingers. A man's voice, deep and satisfied. Does he have any idea what we're doing with his credit? George couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. Couldn't process the words fast enough. Ashley's laugh, that same laugh from their wedding video, from 1,000 Sunday mornings, now sharp and cruel. George? Please. He's so buried in his security work he wouldn't notice if I emptied his accounts tomorrow. By the time the loan documents surface, I'll have divorce papers filed. He takes the fall for everything while we're drinking mojitos in Grand Cayman. The champagne bottle hit the carpet with a muted thud. George Harrison stood paralyzed outside Suite 412, white roses trembling in his hand, listening to his wife plan his destruction between moans of pleasure with another man. George's training kicked in before his emotions could. 20 seconds of standing frozen outside that door, then his brain shifted into a different mode entirely, the same cold analytical state that made him exceptional at his job. Confrontation would give him nothing but temporary satisfaction and permanent disadvantage. He needed information. He needed evidence. He needed to understand exactly how deep this went before they knew he was aware. He backed away from the door silently, picked up the champagne bottle from the carpet, and walked toward the elevator with mechanical precision. His hands weren't shaking anymore. Something inside him had gone very, very quiet. The lobby bar was nearly empty at 5:15 p.m. George ordered a whiskey he wouldn't drink and opened his laptop at a corner table with a clear view of the elevators. His fingers moved across the keyboard with muscle memory efficiency, pulling up network scanning tools he used for penetration testing at work. The St. Regis, for all its luxury, ran on the same commercial-grade Wi-Fi infrastructure as any modern hotel, which meant it had the same vulnerabilities George exploited professionally. It took him 8 minutes to identify the network architecture, 12 minutes to create a spoofed access point, 17 minutes to position himself as a man in the middle on Suite 412's connected devices. The room had a smart speaker, a high-end Sonos system that most guests never thought twice about. George thought about it constantly. It was a microphone. And now it was his microphone. He plugged in his earbuds and opened the audio feed. Think the Vancouver property closes. Marcus's voice, clearer now than through the door. Post-coital conversation. Casual. Comfortable. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Ashley sounded relaxed, satisfied. The challenge isn't the deal, it's keeping George distracted long enough for the loan transfers to clear. He's been asking questions about the credit card statements. You told him it was business expenses. Obviously. He's not stupid, but he's trusting. Fatally trusting. She laughed. I showed him some fake invoices from the designer we used on the bathroom. He actually apologized for questioning me. George's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. How much are we into him for now? Marcus asked. With the HELOC I opened last month? Just over 1.2 million. All in his name, all with forged signatures on the digital documents. He won't know until the bank audit hits, and by then I'll have filed for divorce citing irreconcilable differences. Clean break, no fault state, and George gets to explain to federal investigators why there's $1.2 million in fraudulent property loans tied to his social security number. And the offshore accounts are clean. Spotless. Cayman Corporation, Laird LLCs, everything routing through the Vancouver development on paper. Even if George somehow figures it out, the paper trail points straight back to him. I've got emails from his account discussing the investments, wire transfer authorizations with his digital signature. My attorney already has everything ready. George's fingers hovered over his keyboard, screen recording every word, every admission. What about the divorce timeline? Marcus's voice shifted. I need that capital freed up by March. My debts aren't patient. Ashley's pause was sharp. What debts? Nothing that concerns you. Just business obligations. Old investments that didn't pan out. Marcus, we're talking about over $1 million. If there's something I should know. There's nothing. His tone had an edge now. Focus on your part. Get the divorce filed by Valentine's Day like we planned. The bankruptcy filing goes through in George's name, and we're clear. George sat motionless in the hotel bar, whiskey untouched, recording equipment capturing every syllable of his wife orchestrating his complete financial destruction while planning her escape with a man who was clearly lying to her about something significant. He didn't feel heartbroken anymore. He felt dangerously, perfectly calm. They'd made him the fall guy. Now he'd make himself a ghost, watching, recording, documenting everything while they remained completely unaware that their victim had already disappeared into the machine, gathering evidence they'd never see coming. George caught the 6:42 a.m. flight out of Aspen Friday morning, 3 hours before Ashley's conference schedule showed her first panel discussion. He left the roses in a trash bin outside the airport, still wrapped in their cellophane. The champagne he'd poured down a bathroom sink at the hotel. The upgraded wedding band stayed in his carry-on, a $4,200 reminder of how catastrophically wrong he'd been about everything. The flight back to Seattle was a blur of laptop work and silent rage. George spent the entire 2 hours organizing the audio files he'd captured, 93 minutes of recorded conversation from the smart speaker, all time-stamped, all admissible if he played this correctly. He created encrypted backups on 3 separate cloud servers, then a physical backup on an external drive he'd never connect to his home network. Ashley was good with money and manipulation, but she knew nothing about digital forensics. She had no idea that her hotel room confession was now preserved in 6 different locations, impossible to erase. By the time he landed at SeaTac at 9:15 a.m., George had constructed an entire performance. He went to the gym, something he rarely did but Ashley always nagged him about. He deep-cleaned their condo, scrubbing tile grout in the bathroom they'd renovated together, every stroke of the brush feeling like erasing evidence of something that had never actually existed. He bought groceries, prepped her favorite meal, pan-seared salmon with lemon risotto, and arranged fresh flowers on the kitchen island. Not roses. Never roses again. When Ashley's calendar showed she'd landed Sunday evening, George was on the couch in sweatpants, basketball game on TV, beer in hand. The picture of the unassuming, comfortable husband waiting for his ambitious wife to return from changing their lives. She came through the door at 8:47 p.m., rolling her Rimowa luggage, looking tired but glowing with something George now recognized as post-affair satisfaction masquerading as career success. "Hey babe," she said, dropping her bag and walking over to kiss his cheek. Her lips felt like poison. George smiled, muting the TV. "How was it? Close any big deals?" "Exhausting but incredible." She collapsed next to him on the couch, kicking off her Louboutins. "Marcus introduced me to 3 new investor groups. The Vancouver project is basically guaranteed now. This could be huge for us." "Us." The word tasted like ash in George's mouth, but his face showed nothing but supportive enthusiasm. "That's amazing, Ash. I'm so proud of you." The lie came easily. He'd been practicing. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and George wrapped his arm around her, feeling her body relax against his. The same body that had been wrapped around Marcus Thorne 72 hours ago. The same woman who'd laughed about destroying his life while planning their divorce. "I missed you," she murmured. "Missed you too." Another lie. Easier than the first. She pulled back, studying his face. "You seem different. Good different. Did something happen while I was gone?" George's heart rate didn't change. "Got that bonus I mentioned. Took myself out for a nice dinner, hit the gym a few times. Felt good to focus on myself for a few days." Ashley smiled, kissing him properly this time. "Look at you, getting all self-improvement on me. I like it." He kissed her back, tasting expensive wine and betrayal. "I made salmon. You hungry?" "Starving." They ate dinner together at the kitchen island, Ashley talking animatedly about panel discussions and networking events and the amazing mentorship Marcus was providing. George asked follow-up questions, laughed at appropriate moments, refilled her wine glass twice. He watched her lie to his face with the ease of someone who'd been doing it for months, maybe longer. After dinner, she showered while George loaded the dishwasher. He heard the water running and knew he had maybe 8 minutes. Her phone was charging on the nightstand, Face ID disabled while she was in the bathroom. George had been waiting for this exact moment. He picked up her iPhone, entered the 6-digit passcode he'd watched her type 1,000 times, and connected it to a small device from his laptop bag, a forensic cloning tool that looked like a standard charging cable. The screen showed a progress bar, copying data. 6 minutes for a complete mirror image of everything on her phone. The shower shut off at 5 minutes 40 seconds. George disconnected the cable, placed her phone back exactly where it had been, charging percentage identical. By the time Ashley emerged in her silk robe, hair wrapped in a towel, George was back on the couch scrolling through basketball highlights on his own phone. "Coming to bed soon?" she asked. "Yeah, just want to finish this quarter." She kissed the top of his head. "Don't stay up too late." "I won't." George waited until he heard their bedroom door close, then opened his laptop. Ashley's entire digital life was now copied onto his encrypted drive. Texts, emails, banking apps, photo metadata, location history, everything. He had become a ghost in her machine. And she had absolutely no idea her fall guy had just become her worst nightmare. George waited until Ashley's breathing settled into the deep rhythm of sleep before he moved. 1:47 a.m. according to the bedside clock. He slipped out of bed with practiced silence, grabbed his laptop from the living room, and locked himself in the home office Ashley rarely entered. She called it his tech cave with affectionate dismissal, the place where he did incomprehensible computer things that funded her real work. Tonight, that dismissal would cost her everything. He connected the clone drive and opened the forensic analysis software he used for corporate investigations. Ashley's digital life bloomed across his screen in organized directories. 48,000 text messages, 12,000 emails, 340 banking app logins, metadata from every photo she'd taken in the last 18 months. George started with her message history with Marcus. The affair had been running for 7 months, starting with professional pleasantries about a property investment in March, escalating to sexual content by May, and evolving into criminal conspiracy by August. He screenshot every exchange, organized by date, noting how their conversations shifted from flirtation to fraud with barely a transition. But it was the emails that made his blood freeze. Ashley had created a Gmail account under a variation of his name, georgeharrison.consulting@gmail.com. From that account, she'd been corresponding with 3 different banks about property investment loans, using forged documents with his digital signature. The signature wasn't even a good forgery. She'd clearly scanned one of his old work contracts and copied it onto loan applications using basic photo editing software. George opened the first loan document. Columbia Bank, dated September 15, $340,000 line of credit for commercial property investment in Vancouver, British Columbia. His name, his social security number, his employment information. The signature looked like his, but the application IP address traced to Ashley's phone. Second document. First National Lending, October 3rd. $425,000 bridge loan for residential development project. Same forged signature, same fabricated information about his income, inflated to $280,000 annually to qualify for the loan amount. Third document. Maritime Capital Group, October 28, $510,000 equity line secured against their condo's value. This one made George's hands shake. She'd taken out a loan against their home, his home, where he paid half the mortgage, without his knowledge or consent. Total fraudulent debt in his name, $1,275,000. He found the offshore accounts in her encrypted banking app. She'd used a laughably simple password, Marcus 2024. The Cayman Corporation was called Turner Vista Holdings, her maiden name combined with her company's branding. Subtle as a brick. 3 accounts showing irregular deposits over the past 4 months, totaling $340,000 so far. The exact amount of the first loan. George traced the money flow with forensic accounting tools. Loan funds hit the fake George Harrison consulting account, transferred to Turner Vista Holdings within 48 hours, then distributed between 2 Cayman banks and 1 Swiss account. Ashley had been systematically stealing the loan money while the debt accumulated in George's name. But there was something else buried in her files, a folder labeled Legal Docs Final. George opened it and found the pre-drafted divorce papers, dated for filing on February 13th. No-fault dissolution of marriage, citing irreconcilable differences. Clean, simple, devastating. Attached was a document titled Asset Protection Strategy, a memo from Ashley to herself outlining the timeline. File for divorce in mid-February. Bankruptcy fraud surfaces in March when banks begin auditing. George gets arrested or sued while Ashley claims she had no knowledge of his financial crimes. She emerges as the innocent spouse, keeps her career intact, walks away with her offshore money while George faces federal charges. There was even a contingency plan if he somehow proved his innocence. She'd claim he'd forged documents in her name for revenge, creating reasonable doubt about who defrauded whom. George found himself laughing, a quiet, broken sound in the dark office. She'd thought of everything. Every angle, every contingency, every legal maneuver to destroy him while protecting herself. Almost everything. She'd never considered that her technologically brilliant husband might be paying attention. That the man she dismissed as buried in security audits might turn those same skills against her. That her fall guy might be a cybersecurity analyst with forensic tools she couldn't begin to understand. George started building folders. Evidence Package 1, The Affair. Evidence Package 2, Financial Fraud. Evidence Package 3, Identity Theft and Forgery. Each meticulously organized, time-stamped, with source metadata preserved for legal authenticity. By 4:30 a.m., he had everything documented, encrypted, and backed up to servers Ashley would never find. The sun was starting to rise when George finally returned to bed. Ashley stirred slightly as he slipped under the covers. "Where were you?" she mumbled, half asleep. "Couldn't sleep. Worked a little. Love you." George stared at the ceiling, listening to her breathing return to sleep. "Love you too," he whispered to the darkness. The last lie he'd ever tell her. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while George was in a virtual security meeting, his camera off, barely paying attention to a presentation about next-generation firewall protocols. The number showed as private, which George normally ignored, but something made him step away from his desk and answer. "Mr. Harrison? This is Derek Chen from Columbia Bank's Fraud Prevention Department. Do you have a few minutes to discuss some recent activity on your account?" George's stomach dropped, but his voice stayed perfectly level. "Of course. What's going on?" We flagged some unusual transactions on the commercial line of credit opened in your name this September. Specifically, a series of wire transfers totaling $340,000 to an offshore entity called Turner Vista Holdings. Our algorithm identified the transaction pattern as potentially fraudulent. Can you confirm you authorized these transfers? George walked into the bedroom and closed the door. Ashley was at her office downtown. He'd watched her leave at 8:30 a.m. But he kept his voice casual anyway, just in case. Yes, those transfers are legitimate, George said, his mind racing. They're related to an investment property venture I'm involved with. Is there a problem? The concern is the offshore destination and the rapid fund movement. Within 48 hours of the credit line funding, the entire amount was transferred out. That's a red flag pattern for loan fraud. Additionally, the application IP address doesn't match your typical login locations. George needed to shut this down without creating a paper trail that would alert Ashley. If the bank froze the accounts now, she'd know something was wrong, and she'd destroy evidence, change passwords, maybe even accelerate her timeline. I appreciate the diligence, George said smoothly, but I can explain. My wife works in commercial real estate development, Ashley Turner with Pinnacle Vista Properties. The offshore entity is part of a Vancouver development project she's managing. I'm a passive investor, so she handled the application and transfers from her devices. That's why the IP addresses seem off. A pause. George could hear keyboard typing. I see. And you're aware the debt obligation is solely in your name? Ms. Turner isn't listed as a co-borrower. Correct. It's structured that way for liability purposes related to her firm's investment policies. Is there specific documentation you need from me to clear this flag? More typing. Actually, Mr. Harrison, I'm going to need you to come into a branch office to verify your identity and sign an affidavit confirming these transactions. We can't clear the fraud flag without in-person verification given the amount involved. George's mind worked through the implications. An in-person visit meant records, timestamps, documentation that he'd been questioned about the loans. If he refused, the bank might freeze everything immediately. If he complied, he'd be on record as authorizing the fraud, which could complicate his legal defense later. When would you need me to come in? George asked. Within 72 hours, or we'll be required to freeze the account and report the activity to federal banking authorities. 3 days. Ashley's calendar showed she had a site visit in Portland Thursday through Friday. She'd be gone overnight. Thursday at 2 p.m. works for me, George said. Which branch? Our downtown Seattle location on 4th Avenue. Ask for me directly, Derek Chen, Fraud Prevention. I'll have the documentation ready. Perfect. Thanks for the call. George ended the conversation and immediately texted his college friend Jason Wei, who worked as a forensic accountant for a white-collar crime defense firm. They'd graduated together from University of Washington, had stayed close through the years despite different career paths. Need your legal advice urgently. Can you meet tonight? It's complicated. Jason's response came within 30 seconds. Lou's Bar, 7 p.m. You buying? Always. George deleted the text thread, cleared his call log, and returned to his work computer. The firewall presentation was still droning on. His colleagues had no idea that the quiet analyst in the camera-off box was currently navigating a fraud investigation while gathering evidence against his own wife. That evening, Ashley came home energized, talking about a new property listing in Belltown that could be transformational for her portfolio. George made dinner, asked engaged questions, played the supportive husband with the ease of someone who'd been practicing the role for weeks. You seem distracted, Ashley said over pasta. Everything okay? George smiled. Just a complicated security audit at work. Nothing interesting. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You work too hard. Maybe we should plan a real vacation soon. Not my work trips, something just for us. George looked at her hand on his, the engagement ring he'd saved 3 months to afford, the wedding band he'd slipped on her finger while promising forever. Yeah, he said quietly. Maybe we should. 3 hours later, at Lou's Bar in Capitol Hill, George slid a USB drive across the table to Jason and said the words that would change everything. My wife is framing me for over $1 million in fraud, and I need to know how to prove it without going to prison. Jason picked up his beer, took a long drink, and said, "Tell me everything." Jason Way ordered them both whiskey after George finished explaining, his forensic accountant brain already processing the implications. They'd moved to a back booth at Lou's Bar where the lighting was dim and the Tuesday night crowd was sparse enough for privacy. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Jason said, opening his laptop and pulling up an encrypted note-taking app. "Your wife forged your signature on $1.275 million in fraudulent loans, moved the money offshore through a Cayman corporation, and is planning to file for divorce right before the fraud surfaces so you take the fall while she disappears with her investor boyfriend." "That's the summary, yes. And you have audio recordings of her discussing this, plus a complete clone of her phone showing the forged documents and offshore accounts. All encrypted and backed up in 6 locations." Jason whistled low. "George, this is federal wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, probably RICO if we can prove ongoing criminal enterprise. We're talking decades in prison. For her, I mean, assuming we play this right. That's why I need you." George slid the USB drive across the table. "Everything's on here. But there's something else I need you to trace. The investor, Marcus Thorne. During one of their conversations, he mentioned debts. Old investments that didn't pan out. He told Ashley he needed capital freed up by March and that his debts weren't patient. She didn't know what he was talking about, which means he's hiding something from her too." Jason plugged in the drive and started scrolling through the organized files. His eyes widened as he absorbed the sheer volume of evidence George had compiled. "You built a prosecutable case in 2 weeks. This is insane. I had motivation. Clearly." Jason opened the audio files, listening to snippets of Ashley and Marcus discussing the fraud timeline. "Okay, Marcus Thorne. Let me see what I can find." He opened a terminal window and started running searches through financial databases his firm subscribed to, corporate registrations, bankruptcy filings, liens, judgments. His fingers flew across the keyboard with the same focused intensity George recognized from their university days when they'd pulled all-nighters in the computer lab. "Marcus Thorne, venture capital, Seattle area, here we go." Jason's screen filled with results. "Oh wow. George, your wife picked a winner. What did you find?" Marcus Thorne filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in 2019 after a tech investment collapsed. He emerged from bankruptcy in 2021, but look at this. There are 3 active liens against him totaling $4.7 million from a private equity group called Sentinel Capital Partners. Jason clicked deeper into the records. Sentinel Capital isn't a legitimate PE firm. It's a front. Look at the registration. Cayman Islands, shell corporation structure, no actual business operations. This is a loan shark operation, George. Probably cartel money laundering their cash through investment loans. George felt cold understanding settle over him. So Marcus isn't a successful investor. He's bankrupt and in debt to criminals. Worse than that. Jason pulled up more files. Look at these payment records. Marcus has been making irregular payments to Sentinel. $50,000 here, $75,000 there, but is still $3.2 million in the hole. The payment amounts and timing correlate exactly with Ashley's loan disbursements. George leaned forward, studying the spreadsheet Jason was building in real time. "He's using Ashley to steal my money and credit to pay off cartel debts," George said slowly. "She thinks they're building a future together, but is just using her as a theft mechanism." Exactly. And when the fraud surfaces, Ashley goes to prison and Marcus walks away clean because everything's in her name or yours. The Cayman accounts. I guarantee Marcus has backdoor access. Once Ashley's arrested, he'll drain those accounts and disappear. She's being played just as hard as you were. Jason pulled up another document, a property record for Marcus's home in Medina. His house is in foreclosure. Has been for 6 months. He's got maybe 8 weeks before the bank takes it. That's why he told Ashley he needed capital freed up by March. He's desperate. George sat back, processing the layers of betrayal. Ashley had destroyed their marriage and tried to destroy his life for a man who was using her as a disposable tool to escape cartel debt collectors. Can you build a financial trail showing Marcus is the ultimate beneficiary of the stolen money?
George asked. Already started.
Give me 48 hours and I'll have a complete forensic analysis showing every dollar's movement from the fraudulent loans to Marcus's debt payments. It'll prove Ashley was manipulated, but also that she committed the crimes willingly. Both of them go down.
How much do I owe you for this?
Jason closed his laptop and looked at George with the kind of loyalty that survives a decade past graduation. You covered my bar tab for 4 years at UW when I was broke. You helped me pass network security when I was failing. You were the best man at my wedding, George. You don't owe me anything.
Jason.
But I'm billing Ashley's legal defense fund $450 an hour once this hits court. Consider it the asshole tax.
George felt something close to a smile. Deal. Now let's talk strategy.
You've got this bank meeting Thursday. Don't sign anything that admits you authorized the transfers. Tell them you're cooperating but need to consult an attorney first. That buys us time.
And then?
Jason's expression hardened into something George had never seen before, the look of a forensic accountant who'd found a case worth destroying someone over. Then we build a case so airtight that when it detonates, it takes down everyone involved. Ashley, Marcus, and maybe even some of Sentinel Capital's operation if we're lucky.
There's one more thing, George said.
Ashley mentioned a gala. The Vista Gala in 3 weeks. It's a black tie industry event where she's receiving some kind of award.
Jason grinned.
You want to blow this up publicly. I want everyone who watches her accept that award to know exactly who she is.
Poetic. I like it.
Give me 3 weeks and I'll have everything you need to burn her world down in front of the entire Seattle real estate industry. They shook hands across the table. 2 old friends turned co-conspirators in the systematic destruction of the people who'd underestimated the quiet tech guy. George walked out of Lou's bar at 10:47 p.m., the cold Seattle night air clearing his head. His phone buzzed with a text from Ashley, "Working late, don't wait up. Love you." He didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Ashley came home Thursday night glowing with an excitement George hadn't seen in months. She dropped her bag by the door, kicked off her heels, and practically danced into the kitchen where George was pretending to read security blogs on his tablet. "I have incredible news," she said, pouring herself a glass of the expensive Chardonnay she kept for celebrations. "David just confirmed it. I'm receiving the Rising Star Award at the Vista Gala." George looked up, manufactured surprise on his face. "Ash, that's amazing. What's the award for?" "It's the industry's biggest honor for professionals under 40. They only give out one per year for the entire Pacific Northwest region." She was radiant, practically vibrating with ambition achieved. "David said my Vancouver project and the investor relationships I've built, especially with Marcus, put me over the top. This is career-defining, George. After this award, I can write my own ticket. Senior VP by summer, maybe partner track by next year." "When's the gala?" "February 10th. Black tie, 4 Seasons downtown, about 300 people from every major firm in the region. All the investors, all the power players. I'm giving an acceptance speech and everything." She pulled out her phone, showing him the email announcement. "Look, they're already promoting it on the Vista Conference website. My headshot and bio are on the homepage." George studied the event details with predatory focus masked as supportive interest. February 10th, Saturday evening. Cocktail reception at 6 p.m., dinner at 7, awards presentation at 8:30. Ashley's award was the headline of the evening, the finale before closing remarks. "This is huge, Ash. I'm so proud of you." She set down her wine and wrapped her arms around him, and George forced himself not to recoil from her touch. "You've been so supportive through all of this. The late nights, the travel, the stress. I know I haven't been the most present wife lately. You're building something important. I get it. After the gala, things will calm down. I promise." Maybe we can finally take that vacation we talked about. Her eyes were bright with lies and futures that would never exist. Maybe start thinking seriously about kids. George felt something dark and cold settle in his chest. She was planning their fictional future while actively destroying his real one. The gala was 3 weeks away. The divorce papers in her encrypted files were dated February 13th, 3 days after her big triumph. She was going to accept her award, give her speech, network with the industry elite, then file for divorce and watch the fraud charges surface while she played the innocent victim. Perfect symmetry. Maximum impact with minimum personal risk. You should definitely get a new dress, George said. Something that photographs well. This is a big deal. Already scheduled an appointment at Nordstrom this weekend. I'm thinking something elegant, maybe navy or emerald green. She kissed his cheek. Will you come with me? Give me the husband perspective. Of course. Later that night, after Ashley fell asleep, George texted Jason, target date confirmed. February 10th, Vista Gala, 4 Seasons. She's receiving an award at 8:30 p.m. in front of 300 industry professionals. Can we be ready? Jason's response came immediately. Oh, we'll be ready. This is almost too perfect. George opened his laptop and pulled up the Vista Gala event page. Ashley's professional headshot smiled at him from the homepage. Polished, confident, successful. The biography underneath detailed her rise through Pinnacle Vista Properties, her groundbreaking work on luxury developments, her innovative investor relationships. He screenshot the page and added it to a folder labeled Before. Then he started planning the After. The gala wasn't just a public event, it was a stage. And Ashley had unknowingly given George the perfect moment for maximum devastation. She'd be surrounded by everyone who mattered in her professional world, giving a speech about her success and integrity, basking in recognition and applause. And George would be there, in the audience, watching it all collapse. He opened a document and started outlining the technical requirements. The Four Seasons had installed a new AV system last year. He'd done the cybersecurity assessment for the hotel chain's Seattle properties. He knew exactly how their presentation screens worked, how they connected to the network, what vulnerabilities existed in their control systems. The gala would have multiple large displays for showing award recipient videos and photos. Those screens would be connected to a central media server controlled from a booth at the back of the ballroom. Standard event production setup. Also standard, terrible security protocols. George pulled up the hotel's network architecture from his work files. The AV system ran on the same network as guest Wi-Fi, separated only by basic firewall rules that George could bypass in his sleep. If he could get into the building with his laptop, he could own those screens completely. But it was bigger than just hijacking displays. Jason was building the financial forensics. George had the audio evidence, the cloned phone data, the forged documents. What they needed was a delivery mechanism that would be simultaneous, overwhelming, and impossible to deny. George opened a new file and started scripting. Code that would launch at a specific timestamp. Code that would take control of every screen in that ballroom. Code that would display a synchronized timeline of Ashley's affair and fraud while she stood on stage in her new dress, accepting an award for excellence and integrity. The script would also trigger email blasts to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, to the SEC, to every board member of Pinnacle Vista Properties, to the banking institutions she'd defrauded. Everything documented, time-stamped, legally preserved. Ashley would go from industry rising star to criminal defendant in approximately 4 minutes. George worked until 3 a.m., building and testing the framework. When he finally returned to bed, Ashley stirred slightly. "You okay?" she mumbled, still mostly asleep. "Yeah. Just excited for you. The gala's going to be unforgettable." She smiled without opening her eyes. "It really is." George stared at the ceiling, listening to her breathing settle back into sleep. February 10th. 3 weeks away. She had no idea she was planning her own destruction. George stood in their bedroom doorway watching Ashley apply the final touches of makeup in the mirror, her emerald green gown catching the light with every movement. She'd chosen Ellie Saab, $4,800 at Nordstrom, charged to the credit card that George now knew was funding her escape plan. The dress was stunning, elegant, with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt that would photograph beautifully when she accepted her award. When she was arrested, those same photos would be everywhere. "How do I look?" Ashley turned, and George had to admit she was breathtaking. Hair professionally styled in soft waves, makeup flawless, jewelry minimal but expensive. She looked like success personified. "Perfect," George said, and meant it. She'd dressed for her triumph. She had no idea she'd dressed for her funeral. He adjusted his own bow tie in the mirror. Rental tuxedo from Men's Warehouse, adequate but unremarkable. The supportive husband fading into the background while his brilliant wife shined. It was a role he'd played for 4 years. Tonight would be the final performance. In his jacket pocket, his phone held the trigger script. One tap, and everything would launch. The screens, the emails, the evidence cascade that would end her life as she knew it. "Can you help with this?" Ashley held up her necklace, a delicate diamond pendant George had given her for their 2nd anniversary, back when he believed their promises meant something. George fastened the clasp, his fingers steady. "There you go." She turned and kissed him, careful not to smudge her lipstick. "Thank you for being here tonight. I know these industry things bore you, but it means everything to have you in the audience. Wouldn't miss it for the world." The Uber arrived at 5:47 p.m. Ashley checked her clutch compulsively during the ride. Speech notes, lipstick, phone, business cards for networking after the award presentation. She practiced her opening line under her breath. "I stand here tonight because of the mentors who believed in me and the partnerships that transformed possibility into reality." George wondered if she'd mention Marcus by name. Probably not. Too obvious. But he'd be there, no doubt. Seated somewhere prominent, watching his pawn accept recognition while planning to drain her offshore accounts the moment she was indicted. The Four Seasons lobby was already crowded with Seattle's real estate elite when they arrived. Men in tuxedos, women in designer gowns, the air thick with expensive cologne and competitive networking. Ashley immediately shifted into professional mode, smiling and greeting colleagues while George trailed slightly behind, the invisible spouse. "Ashley, darling, you look stunning." A woman in red approached, someone from Ashley's firm George vaguely recognized from holiday parties. "Thank you. Have you met my husband, George?" Handshakes, polite smiles, forgettable small talk. George played his part perfectly, warm but unobtrusive, proud but not intrusive. Just another supportive spouse at an industry event. They made their way to the ballroom, and George felt his pulse quicken. The room was exactly as he'd planned. 2 massive projection screens flanked the stage, currently displaying the Vista Conference logo in elegant script. A smaller screen stood on the podium for the presenter's notes. The AV control booth was visible at the back left corner, staffed by 2 technicians in black polo shirts. George had already compromised their system 3 days ago during a test run visit to the hotel. He'd posed as a guest, bought a coffee in the lobby, connected to the guest Wi-Fi, and spent 40 minutes in a corner chair systematically bypassing the hotel's network security. The AV system's admin password was literally Four Seasons 2024. He'd wanted to laugh. Now he had complete backdoor access to every screen in this ballroom. "Table 12, Ashley said, checking the seating chart. Their assigned table was mid-room, good sightlines to the stage. Ashley would be called up during the award segment. They'd hold her seat, she'd walk to the stage, accept the crystal trophy, give her speech. George had timed everything for 8:34 p.m., 4 minutes into her acceptance speech. They found their table. Name cards in calligraphy, Ashley Turner and George Harrison. George pulled out Ashley's chair, ever the gentleman. Champagne. A server appeared with a tray. "Please," Ashley said, taking a glass. George declined. He needed to be completely sober for what came next. The table filled with other industry professionals, developers, investors, firm partners George had met at previous events. Everyone congratulated Ashley, asked about her Vancouver project, praised her innovative approach to investor relations. She glowed under the attention, confident and radiant. George checked his watch. 6:23 p.m. 2 hours and 11 minutes. Marcus Thorne entered the ballroom at 6:41 p.m., and George felt his jaw tighten involuntarily. The man looked exactly as George remembered, silver hair perfectly styled, custom tuxedo that probably cost more than George's monthly salary, the easy confidence of someone accustomed to money and power. What George knew now, that no one else in this room knew, was that Marcus was a bankrupt con artist running from cartel debt collectors, using Ashley to steal George's credit and life. Marcus caught Ashley's eye from across the room and gave her a subtle nod. Nothing obvious, just enough for her to know he was watching. She smiled slightly, then turned her attention back to the conversation at her table, the perfect picture of professional composure. George's phone felt heavy in his pocket. Soon, he thought. Very soon. The lights dimmed at 7:02 p.m. as dinner service began. Salmon or beef, the eternal gala choice. George mechanically ate food he couldn't taste while Ashley networked with everyone at their table. She was in her element. Charming, brilliant, ambitious. She had absolutely no idea that in 90 minutes, her entire world would detonate. George excused himself to the restroom at 8:15 p.m. In the hallway outside the ballroom, he pulled out his phone and opened the script interface. Everything was green, connection established, systems ready, payload staged. He sent a final text to Jason, T-19 minutes. You ready? Jason's response, FBI package queued. Sec package queued. Email blasts ready. Press send and watch it burn. George looked at himself in the hallway mirror. The quiet, supportive husband. The invisible tech guy. The man nobody in that ballroom would remember 5 minutes after meeting. Tonight, they'd never forget him. He returned to the table just as the awards segment began. The MC's voice filled the ballroom at 8:29 p.m. And now, for our highest honor of the evening, the Vista Conference Rising Star Award. This year's recipient has demonstrated exceptional innovation in luxury development, visionary investor relations, and a commitment to excellence that represents the future of our industry. Please welcome Ashley Turner of Pinnacle Vista Properties. Applause erupted. Ashley stood, smoothing her emerald dress, her face radiating controlled emotion, the perfect balance of humility and pride. She walked toward the stage with practiced grace, heels clicking on the polished floor. George watched her ascend the steps, accept the crystal trophy from the conference chairman, and step behind the podium. The screens on either side of the stage displayed her professional headshot and career highlights. George checked his watch. 8:31 p.m. Thank you so much, Ashley began, her voice steady and confident. I stand here tonight because of the mentors who believed in me, the partners who challenged me, and the vision of what's possible when integrity meets ambition. George's thumb hovered over his phone screen. 5 years ago, I was a junior account manager with more dreams than experience. Today, I have the privilege of leading transformational projects that reshape our city's landscape. George pressed execute. For exactly 2 seconds, nothing happened. Then every screen in the ballroom went black. Ashley paused mid-sentence, glancing at the screens with mild confusion. The AV technician in the back scrambled toward his controls. Murmurs rippled through the audience. The screens flickered back to life. But instead of Ashley's professional photos, they now showed a timestamp, September 15, 2024, Columbia Bank loan application. George watched Ashley's face drain of color. The left screen displayed a loan document with George's forged signature. The right screen showed bank transfer records. $340,000 moving from the loan disbursement to Turner Vista Holdings in the Cayman Islands within 48 hours. What? Ashley's voice cracked through the microphone. The screens changed. Audio waveforms appeared, then sound filled the ballroom. Ashley's voice, crystal clear, unmistakable. George? Please. He's so buried in his security work he wouldn't notice if I emptied his accounts tomorrow. By the time the loan documents surface, I'll have divorce papers filed. He takes the fall for everything while we're in Grand Cayman watching it burn. Marcus's voice followed, and the offshore accounts are clean. Ashley's laugh, spotless. The ballroom erupted in chaos. People stood, pointing at the screens. Ashley grabbed the podium, her knuckles white. Turn it off. This isn't. But the presentation continued with merciless precision. Timeline after timeline. Forged document after forged document. Text message screenshots between Ashley and Marcus discussing the Fall Guy plan. Bank records showing $1.275 million in fraudulent loans. Offshore account statements. The pre-drafted divorce papers dated 3 days from now. George watched Marcus stand from his table and move toward the exit. He didn't make it. The ballroom doors opened and 4 FBI agents in tactical gear entered from the main entrance. 3 more came through the kitchen doors. 2 Seattle PD detectives followed. Ashley Turner. The lead agent's voice carried across the suddenly silent room. Ashley stood frozen at the podium, crystal trophy still in her hand, emerald dress brilliant under the stage lights. There's been a mistake. FBI. You're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. Please step down from the stage with your hands visible. The screens changed one final time, displaying a single sentence in massive text. Evidence provided by George Harrison, victim of identity theft and fraud. 300 pairs of eyes turned to George's table. He sat perfectly still, watching Ashley's face as understanding finally crashed over her. Her eyes found his across the ballroom. Shock, horror, betrayal, rage cycling through in rapid succession. George met her gaze and didn't look away. Marcus Thorne. Another agent was moving toward Marcus's table. You're also under arrest. Stay where you are. Marcus tried to run anyway. He made it 4 steps before 2 agents tackled him near the champagne fountain, sending glasses crashing to the floor. Someone screamed. Phones emerged from every table, capturing video as federal agents handcuffed Marcus on the ballroom floor. Ashley descended the stage stairs mechanically, still holding her award. An agent took it from her hands and replaced it with handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. George's phone buzzed. Text from Jason, email packages delivered. FBI has everything. SEC has everything. Pinnacle Vista Board has everything.
Banking institution notified.
It's done. Another buzz. A number he didn't recognize. Mr. Harrison, this is Derek Chen from Columbia Bank. We've received the FBI evidence package. The fraud flags on your accounts have been cleared and the debt transferred to the criminal case against Ms. Turner. You're no longer liable. Thank you for your cooperation. Ashley was being led toward the ballroom exit, her makeup running, her carefully styled hair disheveled, her $4,800 dress dragging slightly on the floor. She turned back once, searching the room until she found George again. How could you? She screamed, her voice raw and breaking. I'm your wife. How could you do this to me? George stood slowly, buttoning his rental tuxedo jacket. The entire ballroom watched him walk toward the exit where Ashley stood in handcuffs between 2 federal agents. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that only she could hear him clearly. You were going to send me to prison, George said quietly. For crimes you committed. You were going to destroy my life and disappear with money stolen in my name. So I want you to think about something while you're sitting in your cell tonight. Ashley's face was streaked with tears and rage. I loved you, George continued. Completely. Faithfully. For 4 years, I supported every dream, celebrated every success, and never once doubted you. You had all of me. And you traded it for money that wasn't even real, with a man who was using you as badly as you were using me. George, please. The offshore accounts Marcus set up? He has backdoor access. He was going to drain them the moment you got arrested and disappear. You were never his partner. You were his patsy. Just like I was supposed to be yours. Ashley's legs seemed to buckle slightly. An agent steadied her. Enjoy the award, George said, nodding toward the crystal trophy now bagged as evidence. You earned it. He walked past her, through the ballroom exit, and into the hotel lobby where news vans were already pulling up, alerted by the dozens of videos being uploaded from inside the gala. His phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Harrison? This is Agent Patricia Morrison with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. We need you to come in for a formal statement, but I wanted to thank you personally. The evidence package you compiled is the most thorough civilian fraud documentation I've seen in 15 years. You potentially saved yourself from years of legal hell.
Happy to help. We'll be in touch tomorrow to schedule. And Mr. Harrison, I'm sorry about your marriage.
George ended the call and stood in the Four Seasons lobby, watching through the windows as Ashley was loaded into a federal vehicle, still in her evening gown.
He felt nothing.
No satisfaction, no sadness, no regret.
Just the quiet, empty freedom of a man who'd finally stopped carrying weight that was never his to bear. George walked out into the February night, removed his bow tie, and hailed a cab home to an apartment that would soon be his alone. Behind him, the Vista Gala continued to implode. Ahead of him, the rest of his life waited. George woke up Sunday morning in the condo that felt different already, lighter somehow, despite nothing having physically changed. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, the same view he'd shared with Ashley for 3 years. Except now it was just his view. His space. His life, no longer built on foundations of lies. He made coffee in silence, no longer performing the role of attentive husband. No checking his phone for her morning texts. No pretending everything was fine while dying inside. Just George, coffee, and the strange peace of no longer having to maintain an exhausting charade. The news was everywhere. He opened his laptop to find the Seattle Times homepage dominated by a photo of Ashley in her emerald gown, hands behind her back in federal custody. The headline read, "Rising Star Falls. Local real estate executive arrested for $1.2 million fraud scheme at industry gala." George clicked through to the article. The journalist had clearly spoken to multiple attendees, quotes from shocked colleagues, statements from Pinnacle Vista Properties announcing Ashley's immediate termination, confirmation from the FBI about the charges. Wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering. Marcus Thorne was mentioned as a co-conspirator, also in federal custody, with additional details emerging about his bankruptcy and connections to potential organized crime lending operations. The article mentioned George only briefly. The victim, Ashley Turner's husband George Harrison, a cybersecurity analyst, provided extensive documentation to federal authorities that led to the arrests. His phone had 43 missed calls. Former colleagues of Ashley's, mutual friends, even a few reporters who'd somehow gotten his number. George deleted the voicemails without listening and blocked the unknown numbers. Jason texted at 10:47 a.m., "You see the news? You're a legend." Also, the forensic evidence I submitted got Marcus flagged for a separate federal investigation into the loan shark operation. Sentinel Capital is about to have a very bad month. Coffee this week.
George smiled. Thursday. Lou's Bar.
I'm buying.
He spent the afternoon doing something he hadn't done in months. Absolutely nothing productive. No security audits, no evidence gathering, no performance anxiety about being the perfect supportive spouse. He sat on the couch, watched a basketball game he didn't care about, ordered Thai food, and existed without purpose or pressure. Around 4 p.m., he grabbed his keys. The drive took him north on I-5, then east toward the Cascades on Highway 2. No destination, just movement. His Subaru handled the winding roads easily as civilization gave way to forest, the February afternoon cold but clear. George rolled down the windows despite the temperature, letting the sharp winter air fill his lungs. He stopped at a scenic overlook near Stevens Pass, the mountains stark and beautiful against the darkening sky. A few other cars were parked, couples taking photos, families with thermoses of hot chocolate. George walked to the railing alone and looked out at the wilderness stretching endlessly before him. His phone buzzed. A notification from Columbia Bank, account status update, all fraudulent debts removed. Credit report corrections filed. Your accounts are secure. George deleted the notification and opened his banking app one final time to confirm. Zero fraudulent debt. Clean credit. His savings account intact, actually slightly higher than before thanks to the bonus he'd never spent on the Aspen trip. He had $43,680 in savings, no wife, no legal liability, and the rest of his life spread out ahead of him like the mountain range before him. Another notification. The Seattle Times again, Turner Thorne fraud case, offshore accounts frozen, additional charges pending.
George turned off his phone completely. A young couple walked past, the woman laughing at something her partner said. They looked happy, uncomplicated. George wondered if they were really that simple or if everyone carried hidden weight. He hoped for their sake it was the former. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink. George stayed until the color faded and the temperature dropped enough that his breath came out in visible clouds. On the drive back to Seattle, he made a decision. The condo held too many ghosts, memories of a marriage that had been a performance, renovations they'd planned together that now felt like set pieces in a play that had closed. He'd sell it. Start completely fresh somewhere new. Maybe a smaller place in a different neighborhood. Maybe even a different city entirely. He had no dependents, no obligations, no anchor holding him to a life built around someone who'd never actually existed. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like possibility. George pulled into his parking spot at 8:34 p.m., exactly 24 hours after Ashley's world had detonated in front of 300 witnesses. He sat in his car for a long moment, engine ticking as it cooled, looking up at the windows of the condo that would soon belong to someone else. His phone buzzed again. He'd turned it back on during the drive. A voicemail from a blocked number. Against his better judgment, George listened. Ashley's voice, broken and small. "George, please. They're saying 20 years. My attorney says if I cooperate, maybe 10. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but please. I'm so sorry. The message cut off. Time limit reached. George deleted it without finishing. He went upstairs, poured himself 2 fingers of the expensive whiskey Ashley had kept for celebrations, and sat on the couch they'd picked out together at West Elm 2 years ago. Tomorrow, he'd call a real estate agent. Next week, he'd start looking at new places. Next month, he'd be living a completely different life. But tonight, George Harrison sat in the quiet of his soon-to-be former home and allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in months. Free. The news played on mute across the room. More coverage of the scandal, Ashley's mugshot, aerial footage of the 4 seasons. George raised his glass toward the screen. "To clean slates," he said to the empty room. Then he drank, and finally, let himself breathe. George Harrison walked away with his freedom, his money, and his life intact. Ashley Turner is serving 8 years in federal prison. The lesson: never underestimate the person you're betraying. If you believe loyalty deserves better than lies, subscribe so you never miss these stories. Like if justice was served, and comment your thoughts below. I read every single one. Let me also know where you are watching from. Thanks for watching. The next story of calculated revenge drops soon. Until then, stay smart, stay vigilant, and remember, the quietest person in the room might be the most dangerous one to cross. See you in the next one.